good to see you all. I can see guys behind the camera. I can't see you guys in the camera, but it's good to know you guys are here. And it's wonderful to think that this is still a growing thing. We're trying to work our way through the Old Testament. 2 weeks ago we talked about Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, and then last week we talked about Noah. We're trying to take the major stories of the Old Testament, and what I've talked about is making our way from creation all the way to the cross, to Jesus. God makes declarations, and he says, I'm going to bring it this way, and I'm going to get to here. But every time God makes a declaration, it seems like things would get disrupted. He tells Abraham, I'm going to bring you a son, but Abraham has a hard time waiting on God. He tells Jacob, I'm going to build my kingdom through you, but Reuben, his son Reuben, tries to sleep with his stepmom, and Simeon and Levi are both wicked and evil and violent, and he can't. And it looks like again the plan's going to fall apart. Over and over again, God will declare a champion and say, we're going to go this direction, or we're going to have this thing happen, and then it seems like things would mess up. And through all of it, you have this nation, Israel, that God has all these big plans for, and how they don't seem to be able to hold true to God's plans. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about Moses, and I'm going to hit a couple of high points in his life with them when he's taking the Israelites across the desert to the Promised Land. Moses' life covers the bulk of 5 Bible books, so we won't be able to cover all of it, but I want to cover one very important story that I think is very important, and kind of give you an idea of who Moses was and what he was. So here we go. In Genesis chapter 19, this is kind of preamble for it, prologue. In Genesis 19, verse 3 and 4, Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him from the mountain, and he said, you yourselves, and this mountain is Mount Sinai, where he's going to get the 10 Commandments. He says, you yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings. This notion that I did all the work. Some people read the Old Testament and the New Testament. They say, well, it seems like in the New Testament, God's all grace. In the Old Testament, you got to do it yourself. But even here in Exodus chapter 19, God's doing all the work. That's what this eagle's wing, I carried you, he says. I mean, when you look at this phrase here, that's still very much a grace thing. I saw you, and you had nothing. You were slaves, and I carried you and brought you to myself. He says, now if you obey me fully and you keep my covenant, then out of all the nations, you're going to be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be a kingdom of priests. Now later in the New Testament, 1 Peter 2, 9 and 10, he's going to come back and hit that idea, a chosen people, a royal priesthood. But it starts right here. God's plan is that each person in Israel is going to be able to be his representative to the world. What you're going to see way later in some of Paul's writings is this idea of us becoming ambassadors. And again, you see this real parallel between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It was always God's plan that all of his people could stand up for him and represent him to the whole world. But it starts with obeying him. It starts with keeping the covenant. So the people say, we're in. We're in, God. I mean, we'll do everything you've asked us to do. And Moses took their answer back to the Lord. On the morning of the 3rd day, after they camped at that mountain there for 3 days, there was thunder and lightning and a thick cloud over the mountain and a loud trumpet blast, and everyone in the camp trembled. Mount Sinai was covered with smoke. The Lord descended upon it in fire. Smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace, and the whole mountain trembled violently. And as the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder, Moses spoke, and the voice of God answered him. Now, it's curious. I mean, to me, you get a little picture of God here that's important to carry into the New Testament. Sometimes we see the New Testament, we think that Jesus is completely gentle, and the Old Testament things don't apply anymore. But God's going to great lengths here with smoke and like a furnace, and the mountains trembling and violently, and a loud sound. I mean, he's really shocking them. You know, that what you're getting ready to experience with me is not, I'm not trivial, God says. And I'm not something that's just that you can trifle with. You know, it's not a lot of religion. You go and you put your time in at the temple. You go put your time in at the church, or at the whatever altar it is, and then you leave and live your life until you need some help from God again, or until you make a mistake. Then you go back and you do it all over again. And God says, that's not really how I am. I'm going to demand a little more attention than that. You're going to be very careful around me. And God spoke these words. And this Exodus 20, that's the beginning of the Ten Commandments. He says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And this notion here again, God carried. So that's grace. And again, out of the land of slavery, slaves to a promise. God's taken them someplace and has intention to take them someplace, has intention to make them something. And then he gives them the Ten Commandments. Now, I didn't write all those down. I assume you've heard the Ten Commandments, or if you haven't, you can certainly look it up. Again, it's Exodus chapter 20. But he lays out the commandments, and the way he lays them out, some people think these first 5 are more about how you deal with God, and these second 5 are how you deal with people. And it's an interesting way to look because of this one here. But he starts off by saying, no other gods but me, and no idols. And when he says idols, he's not thinking that you're actually going to worship a piece of wood or a piece of metal, but you're going to assume that metal or that wood is a conductor that you can go to, and that will get you in front of God. Says, don't do that. In fact, what this one will say is about a graven image, and there was a thought in for a long time in the church that we shouldn't even make pictures or statues of God. One of the things that Michelangelo does when he makes the painting of God with Adam, that was unusual because God usually wasn't painted. It wasn't something that was normally done, and they were afraid of making any sort of a representation of him. You don't misuse God's name. You take the Sabbath and you honor it. And even this part about honoring parents has in mind a little bit about putting God. The same way you look at your parents with respect, God's to be held like that. And then, of course, all these other things. One last thing on the Ten Commandments. He starts here by saying, focus on God completely. And the very last one, don't focus on your neighbor and what they have, especially compared to what you don't. So a lot of the Ten Commandments is about that proper focus. Put your attention on God. He's the main thing. Don't allow your attention to get distracted by idols or make God seem trivial. Don't make sure you take time to put him in the proper place, to know your place and to put him in the proper place. When you treat other people, is to be treating them the right way and not knocking them down. And this coveting thing is a hard law to enforce because it's your heart, right? I can see if you murder, but I can't necessarily see if you covet, but God can. And so what God's saying right here is something he's going to say all the rest of the way through the Bible. In particular, in the Sermon on the Mount, God said, I'm not just interested in what you do. I'm interested in how you think. I'm interested in how you feel. I want everything. And this covenant that he lays out here is intense. But the people, remember, said, we want it, God. And while this is happening, all the same things we just read are happening. As he's handing this to the people, there's smoke and fire and thunder. I'm going to try it up here. And the trumpet. I don't know how the trumpet, it's always kind of a weird thing if God is making the trumpet happen or something that sounds like a trumpet. If God plays the trumpet, I don't know what that is. But all that's happening at the same time. So it's noisy and it's loud and it's intense. When the people saw that, the thunder and the lightning, and they heard the trumpet and they saw the mountain of smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, you speak to us yourself and we will listen, but don't have God speak to us or we'll die. And Moses becomes a mediator. He stands between God and us. We aren't able to go to God, but Moses can. And in that way, Moses becomes an early picture of what Jesus will do more permanently. He becomes an intermediary between us and God. He speaks to God on our behalf. When we go to God, we can ask whatever we want, trusting that he's a faithful high priest who's going to take it right to God, tempted in every way we were without sin, and that God is going to represent us. Between God and man, there's one mediator, the man Christ Jesus, and Moses is in that role there at this time. You do it. So get that picture. It's really important. The people want to be close to God. They want to understand God. They want to be God's people, a kingdom of priests. But God is scary and frightening. And Moses is going to go talk to him. And Moses is gone for a long time, 40 days. For 40 days and 40 nights. And 40 is kind of an important number in Bible. It's always like Goliath speaks for 40 days. Jesus fasts for 40 days. Noah, excuse me, the flood was 40 days of rain. 40 days is like always the length of God's judgment and time, and Moses is up on the mountain for a long time. And again, for 40 days, smoke, thunder, fire, trumpet. For 40 days. I don't know how you sleep during all that. I don't know how you function. I don't know. But something changes with the people. At first, a few verses ago, it said they trembled when they heard it. They were frightened. But 40 days go by. Maybe somewhere around day 20, it's not quite as intimidating as it used to be. I read a thing about the Blitz in London when the Germans were bombing the British people and bombed them for months. Every night for like 9 months. I mean, bombed them every night, sent missiles over and rocked. And at first, of course, it's just terrifying. But what studies have shown, when historians looked at them, Britain knew it'd be brutal, and so they built all these psychiatric hospitals. They knew the people would be shell-shocked, and they eventually closed them like a month or two in. People just weren't going. I mean, the bombs were terrifying, but after you go through a couple nights of it, you just kind of get used to it. It's a weird human nature thing. I don't like it, but you just sort of deal with it. And it seems like after a few days, the people get like that with this. They just get used to it. And when the people saw that Moses was so long, and we're into 32 now, when they saw that Moses was so long coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron, and they said, "Come make us gods who will go up before us. As for this fellow Moses, who brought us up out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Now, they've not totally rejected God outright, and they've not even totally rejected Moses, but this contempt, they're looking down on Moses. Maybe it's because of the 40 days. We thought by now he'd be back. We don't even know what's going on. When he went up in that mountain, it was frightening. That was terrible, but he's been 40 days, and we've not heard anything. So Aaron, that's who they go to, Moses' brother, Aaron, he says, "We'll take off the gold earrings that your wives and your sons and daughters are wearing, bring them to me." And he took what they handed him, and he made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf. And it says he fashioned it with a tool. Later on, he's going to say it was an accident. He didn't do anything. But here it says he worked on it. And they said, "Well, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt. These are your gods." Now, there's a couple schools of thought here. Some people think that what they believe is this calf now is God. And that this calf somehow, even though it wasn't made yet, went back in time and it's the one. So if that's what it is, it's certainly a foolishness. They've basically given up on God altogether, and they don't want any part of it. But I don't think that's what's going on here. When he says, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up Egypt," I think he's comparing the calf to God. I think Aaron is comparing the calf to God. And what he's trying to do is make God more relatable, more controllable. All that thunder and lightning and stuff we can't understand. Yeah, that's going on behind me here, but this calf, we can deal with this calf. Yeah, God can see you wherever you are, but this calf, he's going to be in a box over here, and if we need him, we'll bring him out and we'll deal with him. And when we don't need him, we'll put him back in the box. You can deal with a calf. You can deal with a thing. It's just a thing. God's hard to deal with. I think what they're saying is we want to control God. I think that's what the golden calf's about here. We want to control God. They know that the calf didn't bring them out of Egypt. It hadn't been created yet. Aaron built an altar in front of the calf and said, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." So again, I think Aaron is equating those two things, the calf and the Lord. In Aaron's mind, in the people's mind, when we worship the calf, they said we're worshiping the Lord. And the next day the people rose up early and they sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings. And afterward they sat down to eat and drink and indulge in revelry. And that almost certainly has a sexual connotation. And so it just became a wild party. It just became some crazy. And so whatever their intentions were at first, we're just going to worship the Lord. Well, they want to worship him the way they want to worship him. And honestly, they want to worship him the way the Egyptians worshiped their gods. We want to do the same things that they did. Some of this stuff is the same thing. If you read about Exodus, they're over and over again saying, we want to just go back to Egypt. Yeah, we were slaves. We understood that. And there's some of this here now. We want to worship God like they worship God. That's a great, big, powerful nation, and we want to be like that. And the Lord says to Moses, you need to go down. While that's happening, and God sees all the preparation of it, right? I mean, God sees them talking, and God sees Aaron making the calf, and he sees, but after it's done and they finally have committed to it and they're eating and drinking and revelry, the Lord said to Moses, go down, he says, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt. Leave me alone so my anger may burn against them, and I'll destroy them, and then I'll make you into a great nation. They're no longer God's people. Moses, they're your people. God says, I want nothing to do with them any longer. Moses sought the favor of the Lord. He says, Lord, why should your anger burn against your people? Moses, neither one of them totally want the Israelites. He reminds, they're your people, God. They're not mine. They're your people, whom you brought up. It's like he's disagreeing with, it's like two children talking to each other. And I want to talk about this in a second, but remember, you are the one with a great power and a mighty hand. And then he starts trying to appeal to God's reason. Why should the Egyptians say it was out of evil intent he brought them out to kill them in the mountains? So turn from your fierce anger, he says, relent and don't bring disaster on your people. Remember to God, like God could forget. And that's an interesting, well, I'm going to get to it in a second. Remember, he says, your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel. And Israel is Jacob, same person. Remember, Jacob gets renamed Israel. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, who you swore you'd make descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and give them that land, it'd be theirs forever. And then the Lord relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. Some Bibles will translate this word relented as repented. And it can get translated either way. And some people will some Bibles, King James I think notably, will translate this word disaster evil. The Lord repented of the evil he had threatened, relented, and did not bring the disaster he had threatened. The NIV, that's the translation I'm using here, kind of softens both those things. And I understand the temptation to soften both those things. I do. When I read a story like this, if I knew nothing else about the Bible, all I had was this story, it would seem like to me that God's pretty unstable. It would seem like to me that God, man, he's just hanging on the ragged edge. If all I had of Scripture was this story, it would seem like to me that Moses is the compassionate one, that God's the loose cannon, and Moses has to talk sense into God, kind of talk him off the ledge and calm him down. Now, because I have my whole Bible, and I know everything, I study any part of it, and I can look at, I've got kind of a more well-rounded picture of God, and it's easy because of that to dismiss this story. Well, you've got to understand what's going on. God's probably trying just to test Moses. Maybe what God's doing is trying to kind of help Moses figure some stuff out. And certainly, in this story, Moses becomes more of a leader than he was at the beginning. Through all of this, Moses becomes really the mediator that Israel needs, but that's not what's written down. What's written down is that God is about to blow up, and the only thing that keeps him from blowing up is the prayers of Moses. And I think we should read it like it's written. Again, it's just one story, and the Bible's a great big book, and to take one verse or one story and make your whole picture of God from one verse or one story, that's not wise. God is much bigger and much harder. But this is interesting. This seems to say that prayer from us can change God's mind, that God can be saying, we're going to go left, and if his people pray, sometimes you go right. Now, I don't think it's an all the time thing. Sometimes God says it's going to be this way, and you can pray as long as you want. It doesn't matter. But we've seen that. If you've been a Christian very long, your whole church got together and prayed for somebody who the doctor said had no hope at all, and they survived. Or maybe you got together for one of your family members or a friend of yours, and it seemed like they were as far from God as could be, and you prayed and prayed and prayed, and their heart opened, and you never thought it would happen, but it did. We've seen miracles, little miracles like that, and big miracles like that in our lives, where it seems like everything was going one direction and prayer turned it around. And this story backs that up. The other thing that this story gives you a picture of, and I don't want to spend too much time here because I still have a lot of stuff to do, but the wrath of God, that when we sin, it really does offend God. It's not something that he just kind of ignores. I mean, it really irritates him. It really picks at him. It makes Jesus' sacrifice on the cross all the more precious that God loved us too much to do without us and sent his son Jesus to pay for the sin that we just couldn't pay for ourselves. Moses is the intercessor here. Thank God Jesus is our intercessor now and takes care of us. So anyway, at the end of this, a lot of stuff happens. Moses walks down the hill. I'm just going to cover a lot of verses quickly here. Moses walks down the hill and sees the people and their deal. He takes the 10 Commandments tablets and he busts them up, signifying that there's no more covenant. Covenant is over. He grounds the calf up, the golden calf up into a powder, and he makes them drink it. And I don't totally know what that's about. There's a weird passage in Numbers where if a spouse thought their spouse was unfaithful, if a husband thought his wife was unfaithful, he could make her drink a thing. And if she drank the thing and was unfaithful, it would show on her somehow. And there's some guys who think that's what's going on, that by drinking the calf, the ones who were guilty of doing stuff bad, it would show up. But I don't know if that's, it could just be because it tasted so awful, and so he's punishing them that way. Moses, has the Levites execute 3,000 people nearly are executed because of this. And again, if this showed something, maybe that's how they knew who to execute, or maybe it was obvious who the leaders were, or maybe the leaders are actually fighting back. You know, we want the calf now. They're not giving up on the calf. God sends a plague. We don't know if the plague actually killed people or not, or if it just made everybody sick. But I mean, the whole nation is affected by this. It's not just stuff Moses is doing. And then at the end, God says, I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to let you go on to the promised land, but I'm not going. I'll send you guys on ahead, but I'm not doing it. And he says that in Exodus 33. You go up to the land with milk and honey, but I'm not going. You're stiff-necked people. I might destroy you on the way. Again, this sounds like something Donald Trump would say. It doesn't sound like something that I picture God saying. You know, you can't ride my limousine. You might say something stupid, and I'd have to have the Secret Service take you out for you. I mean, Trump might say, but I don't think God would say that, right? Some king in some third world nation could say that. I'm not riding with you because you might say something stupid. I'd have you killed. You would assume that God would be made of tougher stuff than that, right? And again, Bible's a great big book. I know that Jesus and God is patient and compassionate, and I have a well-rounded picture of him. But this is part of that picture of God. I mean, certain sins really rile God up. I mean, they fly all over him. And the sin here was they were trying to make God manageable, and honestly, trying to make God controlled. And I think, just personally talking, I think Americans can do that sometimes. We try to box God into just a church, right? Or just even a small group. That this is where I do that, and if I need it, I know where it's at. We do it with prayer. God, if I need you, I know how to get a hold of you. And days and days and days can go by without us praying. We do it with reading God's Word. You know, if I need to figure something out, God, I'll sure know where that Bible is, and I'll open it up and I'll study that. But right now I'm doing fine. And I think that kind of, it's condescending, right? If God is who the Bible says that he is, God has carried us all the way. We were slaves and didn't deserve anything, and Jesus has paid everything for us. It was fantastically offensive then to tell God, I know where you are if I need you. I don't know if that's the whole thing, but when I read it, that's the thing that keeps screaming back to me. But when the people, and again, this is part of why I think they weren't trying to replace God as much as control how God. When the people heard the distressing words, they began to mourn. I mean, I don't think they ever intended to lose God's presence altogether. I mean, I don't think that was ever their hope. I just think they wanted to deal with it different than they were before. You know, Moses went up and talked to you, God, but maybe we'd like to be a little more in charge of this relationship. And when they hear it, God's thinking about going the other direction, they're horrified. Moses, all in the same chapter here, he used to take a tent and he had to pitch it outside the camp, some distance away. And anyone inquiring the Lord could go to that tent a meeting. And whenever Moses went out to that tent, all the people would rise and stand at the entrances of their tents, and they'd watch Moses till he entered the tent. And Moses would go in the tent in the pillar of cloud, which is, that's God. It's another thing about all these stories. You like to think if I could just see God, I would act different. Every day they could see God. It was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. They could always see some representation of God. When Moses went in the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance, and Moses would talk with the Lord. And when the people saw that, they would stand and worship, each at the entrance of their tent, and the Lord would speak to Moses like you talk to a friend. But again, it was all outside the camp. God's not dealing with the people anymore. He's just going to deal with Moses. Now, Moses and God have a relationship, but none of the people do. And when they see Moses talk to him, well, they all worship God from a distance. And I assume it's a repentant kind of thing. God, take us back, take us back, take us back. But God and Moses are okay, but God and the people are not. And so Moses, again, he's a mediator. He's making peace between God and the people. Moses said to the Lord, you've been telling me lead these people, but you've not let me know who you're going to send with me. And I think this verse here, the question is, are you still going to kill them? Are you still going to eliminate Israel? Is it all over? Or who are you going to send with me? He could be talking about Israel. He could be talking about God. Are you not going to go with us, God? Your presence again. And the Lord, he says, remember, this nation's your people. And the Lord replied, my presence will go with you, and it'll give you rest. But the you here, and you is single. It's not a plural thing at all. He's talking to Moses. I'll go with you, Moses. I'll give you rest, Moses. But Moses tells him, if your presence doesn't go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you're pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth? And the Lord said to Moses, I'll do the thing you've asked because I'm pleased with you and I know you by name. So I'm going to go with you. It raises an interesting question, and it's probably too thick a question to handle in the small groups tonight, but it's an interesting thing to think through. Moses says, we would rather stay in the desert with God than go to paradise without God. I think it's interesting. We would rather be in the middle of nothing but have God's presence than to have everything, land of milk and honey, and not have God. I think it's interesting. Would heaven still be heaven if God weren't there? You know, a lot of times the attitude that I talked about earlier, God, if I need you, I know where you are, it betrays something in us. That we're content with this second one. That we're content to, if I can have what I want, God, without dealing with you, that's good enough. Moses chooses this one. And when the people get a glimpse of what this second thing looks like, that's the one they want too. They want that. God, we want your presence more than any other thing. And so it made me, reading the story, think back to when I first became a Christian, when it first really started to make sense to me, you know, and how I felt in that moment, and how real it felt, and how for the first time I saw my sin in pretty stark relief, and I knew that dark part of me was never going to allow me to stand in front of God. When I had some sense that Jesus was willing to carry that for me and to be my friend, talk to me face to face like a friend, it changed everything. Sometimes, since then, I get so caught up with the things of this world that I forget that higher, greater, better thing, and I exchange it for a cheap imitation. Moses is not willing to do it, and God gives Moses what he wants. One last thing, we're almost done. When Moses came down from Mount Sinai, and he has the 2 tablets of the law in his hands, he was not aware that his face was radiant, because he had spoken with the Lord. When Aaron and the Israelites saw that his face was radiant, and we don't know what radiant means here. We don't know if I don't know what that means. If it's a tradition, like in the old art, it would be a halo, right, shining down and around him. If it meant he was just glowing, glowing is probably as good as anything because the veil seems to cover the problem. Or if it's like a halogen light, just to look at him, it's just people are just hiding their eyes. But they were afraid when they saw it. It freaked them out. It wasn't just sunburn, right? Like people come back from the beach, got a little healthy glow. It's more than that. Whatever it is, it's something more intense. And Moses, it says he put a veil over his face. But whenever he entered the Lord's presence to speak with him, he would remove the veil until he came out. Moses is still able to go into God's presence, and it changes him. It makes him different. There's a verse in Matthew 5, 14 through 16, but especially verse 16, that says we're to let our light shine in such a way that people will see it and give glory to God, that there's supposed to be something about us that's transcendently different. The quality of our lives, the intensity of our focus is supposed to shine. Paul says in Philippians, like a bright light in a dark and depraved world. You know, we shine like children of stars in a crooked and depraved generation. There's a picture in the Old Testament where Abraham looks at the sky and sees a sky full of stars, and God says, that's how your family, that's how Israel's going to be. And at some level, the church, which is grafted in, that's how we're going to be. We're going to shine like stars in a dark, dark sky. Your life should have that kind of quality, and it comes from entering into the Lord's presence. Now, in the New Testament era, I'm not aware of anybody who starts to glow, right? Like physically, visibly glow, like you could photograph it. But I have seen people often who were radiant because of their connection with Jesus. It was so intense and it was so all the time that it just leaked out of every part of them. I think that's a worthwhile dream and a worthwhile goal. And so lessons of the story, and we're going to talk, Gabe and I, here in a second a little more intensely, but let's hit on a couple of the lessons of the story, because there's 2 or 3 that are real important. First, Moses becomes the mediator between Israel, which is broken, and a holy God. We still need a mediator, and his name is Jesus Christ. The people say at the beginning they want to follow God, and at first they're real intensely afraid of all the things they see, but eventually they get bored with it. They've seen it, they've heard it, they've thought about it. It doesn't seem as threatening as it did at first. And I can't speak for you, but I know in my own life, when I first became a Christian, the notion of hell was terrifying. But sometimes after being Christian for a while, it becomes hard to imagine you would ever qualify for a place like that. And all those fears of God start to go to the back burner. But the Proverbs tell us the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. When I get to where I no longer know my place, bad things start to happen. And it happens with these guys. They immediately try to exchange God, who's uncontrollable, for an image that they can control. We still try to do that. We try to take God, who's uncontrollable, and put him in a church-sized box that we can pull out whenever we need to. And he just won't put up with that. People who get that are transformed by it. And that's what I wish for you. Let me pray, and then we're going to move over. Dear Lord God, thank you for a chance to come together. Thank you, God, for your word. So much stuff, God, to think about and to focus on. And I pray, God, that we're able to take it to heart. In Christ's name, amen.
Alex moved the camera, and I wasn't ready for it.
Oh my gosh, are you serious? Okay.
A lot of people saw me.
Is that on there too?
Yeah, we're live now.
That box. Is that on there?
No, that's not there.
Okay. Hi.
I'll let you do your stuff. You let me do my stuff, okay? I was looking at the computer, and then I see my face. I'm like, wait, we're live.
Yeah, we're live. Yeah.
Okay, so I think
You
we're
do your
good.
stuff.
All right, hang on a sec.
Just take a minute. Am I not on?
Yeah, you're on.
Oh, okay.
I just wasn't ready. I wasn't paying attention. It's not your really. It's not your fault. I just honestly was not paying attention.
Okay.
Okay.
You weren't asleep, were you? It wasn't like that.
No. It's
Okay.
on Facebook. No. Okay. All right. So we have 4 discussion questions for tonight. We don't have to go through them all, but these questions for you watching are for you to discuss within your group. So we'll try to briefly touch on some answers, have some discussion for these questions, and then we'll let you discuss after this is over. So the first question that we got was, what's the point of the thunder, smoke, and trumpet blast if not allowing them to touch the mountain?
Well, I didn't mention that not allowing to touch the mountain, but that was in there too. God wouldn't even let them touch the mountain when they got close. He said if anybody touches the mountain, you got to kill them by either throwing rocks at them until they die or shoot them with arrows. You can't even get close. You can't touch them when you're killing them. That mountain was to be holy for God. And that's kind of the whole point of all of it, which is, it's a curious thing. God is calling them to be his friends. He's calling them my treasured possession. You'll be a kingdom of priests. But at the same time, it's like with one hand, he's pulling them close, but with the other hand, he's reminding them, hey, you can't get too close. And I just think it's interesting. I don't know what I make of it. I mean, it's his holiness has to be part of the answer, but it's just an interesting deal. That part does change in the New Testament. And what changes is that because Jesus has paid for our sin, we can approach the holiness of God, so we can come close. But that picture in the Old Testament about him saying with one hand, come close to me, you're my treasured possession. Oh, no, not too close. I just think it's an interesting picture.
Right. That and the arrows and all. It sounds like a fun youth group.
It would be a fun youth group
as
thing.
you were
right.
saying it, I'm like, that,
Right.
we can make that happen.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so the second question, Exodus 19 and 20. What were God's expectations for Israel? What right did God have to make those demands? And how do the Ten Commandments lay all of that out?
Well, I mean, of course, any one of you might think that you could manage creation better than God does, but you don't have your creation, and he does. So it's his world, and I think because that, he's got every right to say, we're going to do it my way. The beauty of the covenant with the Ten Commandments is that most of what God asks us to do is stuff that most people agree, even people far from God, that this is how we should be. You shouldn't kill folks.
Right.
Shouldn't lie. Shouldn't steal. I mean, most of us agree on all those things, and it's just basic kindness to one another, and then a lot of respect to God. If God is the one who has done all these things for us, then he deserves our attention and our respect and our worship. The cool part about giving God that respect, and even there's one command in there about honoring your parents. The cool part about giving respect to those who deserve it, whoever that is it helps you stay in your lane and helps you stay in your place. Most of the problems that we get into is when we start thinking we're bigger than we are,
right,
or smaller than we are. Either one causes some damage. And when we have kind of a proper perspective of who we are, our lives seem to work out a lot better. I wanted to do the icebreaker with you. Did you read that one?
Oh, where were you when you first experienced the reality of God? What happened? Do you still have special feelings about that place? How so?
Do you have anything like that? You may go first. You can think about it.
Yeah, go first. I already know what it's going to be.
Well, yeah, you know mine. 'Cause I talk about it every year at camp.
Aerosmith concert.
It was an Aerosmith concert. No, it wasn't that. It was though would be a spiritual experience, but no, it wasn't that. It was Wonder Valley, and it was the first time I went to camp. I didn't really want to go. I was kind of talked into it. I was a freshman and a senior, and we were friends, and partly to impress that guy. You know, I wanted him to think that I was the kind of guy he could be friends with, and he invited me to camp, and I didn't really have a reason not to want it, but I went to camp with him, and it was a little intimidating because I was just a freshman, and you feel small and at the end of the rope on all those things, but everything they talked about that week, man, it just was crushing me over and over and over again. That we had one session on the hillside outside of the camp, where they got the whole camp on this hillside, and we watched the sunset, and they went through part of the Sermon on the Mount, and like every word of it, and I didn't know what the Sermon on the Mount was, but it was just crushing me. And I remember where I was sitting. I mean, the pews in the chapel there moved, but I can pretty close get you to where I was sitting when it first convicted me. And yeah, for me, there's still a real special feeling about that place. When I go to that place, and there's different places at the camp there, when I stand there, I can think of different commitments I made to God. Right. Of course, there's nothing special about that place in and of itself. It's just dirt and rock and trees. There's nothing special. Some of the buildings aren't, some of those buildings are quite old now. Right. A few of the buildings have you could blindfold me, and if I woke up smelling it, I wouldn't know which building I was in. Some of the buildings have that kind of an experience. But it's holy ground to me. Right. But it's because of the experience. It's because of what God did to me that day. Now I want you to answer, but if you don't have an answer,
I share this part a lot. It was after a football game, high school football game, and there's a school ministry that they would go around, and after a football game, they would do what they call a fifth quarter. So it was like a big thing, free pizza and games, and they invited everyone after the football game to come. So on my way out, one of my teammates invited me to go in, and he went to a youth group, and I didn't know that. I just, he invited me to go, so it was on my way out.
Right.
And he said that he'd give me a ride home. So I was like, all right, I'll stay.
Yeah.
And I got in, and his youth pastor was teaching that night, and I had been to church before, but this guy, his name was Leonard, and he was really kind. I could tell he cared, and it's something about, in youth ministry, I think the stigma was like, the pastor doesn't really know you. He's too busy. He's
Right.
jumping around and being loud and crazy, but not this guy. He was calm, and he knew my name somehow. He just, he knew who I was, and it looked like he cared, and he taught, and we were all in the pews. There must have been 100 of us, and he shared the gospel.
They had pews?
Or bleachers, sorry. Yeah, this was an old school. No, at the bleachers.
Wow.
They felt
Well, it felt like
same
pews.
thing.
So I don't know what
It's
you're
the
talking
same
about.
thing,
Right. No, that's right.
And and he shared the gospel, and they had kind of like an altar call type thing, and I walked down to learn more. And their altar call thing, it was different. It wasn't just come receive a prayer and go home,
Yeah.
but there was more accountability to that. So yeah, I started going to the youth group, and
Did that place become different for you? Because I would think that'd still be the high school. That probably wouldn't have anything special about the place.
Well, see, for me, it wasn't the place. It was the ministry as a whole. That ministry has a dear place in my heart, and I served in that ministry when I graduated. Now my brother Omar serving in that ministry himself, and
so it's the organization, how it was structured, and the whole team.
So it's not. I don't
think
think it's the place, because in that same place I've ran
right
for many
it's
hours.
school,
Yeah.
right.
So it's not.
Right. Okay. Right.
I don't want. I can't smell
Get
the
misty,
gym.
yeah.
And, it's not that.
Okay. Fine. Well, so that's it. That's the stuff, and we don't go through all the questions. There's a couple more questions there if you have time. I don't want to take the whole hour with us, but that icebreaker question could be a pretty effective way, just in your group, to get to know each other better and to get to each other, know each other spiritually, maybe a little better than you do.
Yeah. So this is the third. So in 2 weeks, we have communicated with some groups and some leaders, but in case we haven't reached everyone, in 2 weeks on the 17th, we have a break that we have planned into the study. And our intention is that you still meet on the 17th, that's in 2 weeks. And we want to go serve as a church, but in different groups. So we have different ways to serve in the community on that Wednesday night. We're either going to Bertha's Mission or Becky's Place or Hope Resource Center, and we're going to go serve together. So some of us groups are going to pair with other groups and go do different service projects. So we hope you still meet and you still have time. We do this because we believe that as a church, we're supposed to serve together. We're supposed to practice what we're learning on Wednesday night. So that is coming up in 2 weeks, and we're going to contact all the leaders just to make sure we know what we're doing.
I know some of the groups have kids, and this is something maybe as a family you ought to consider doing together. It's really good to take the kids along and do that as a family. That's kind of a powerful thing. If for some reason you cannot do that particular week but want to do a service thing later on, communicate with us, and we'll try to help you out best we can.
Yeah. And what you're saying about family, a lot of small groups and people that do serve in these places do take their family.
Mm-hmm.
You can't take your kids, and there's plenty of stuff to do at Bertha's or Hope for that. So that's coming up in 2 weeks. And besides that, we invite you to join us Sunday morning. We have two services here in the building or online for our 10:30 service, just reminding you of that. And our church app. I'm plugging in our church app wherever I can. We have a new church app, MPCC Bedford, and it's really cool. You can watch this study or all of Jeff's sermons for the last, I don't know.
They're not all downloaded,
For a
but a
while.
lot of them are. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's several there.
the most recent ones are
Yeah.
there, and there's just a lot of content there, and that's what it's for. So we hope you download it and enjoy it. It's a great tool. But that's all I have.
Yep.
So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.